Hey there, it's Andrea. Welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Dr. Carla Fowler. She is an MD, PhD, and an elite executive coach. For the last decade, she has been a secret weapon for scores of CEOs, entrepreneurs, and other senior leaders. Carla's unique approach combines the latest research from performance science with timeless best practices to help top performers level up and achieve their goals. Carla graduated from Brown University magna cum laude, earned her MD and PhD at the University of Washington, and completed her internship in general surgery at Stanford University. Welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast, Carla Fowler.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm so excited to be here.
So, out the gate, I'm looking at this going, okay, how did we make the transition from the medical field to the coaching field? I'm really curious about what led you to that.
Well, I'll answer the first piece of that, which is it definitely wasn't planned. I don't think anyone sort of goes as far down a medical pathway as I did, thinking like, oh, but I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to do something sort of different.
I mean, how
Um,
many years are we talking? I
so
can.
Great question. So you do your undergrad and then you apply for medical school. And in my case, I applied for this like joint degree program. And this will just tell you and maybe the audience a little bit about myself. I'm either a glutton for punishment or I just have like I get excited about something and I'm better at this now, but I don't always think through, like, for example, oh, what are all the painful parts of that thing going to be? It's a little like you run off the cliff and then you build your parachute on the way down, and it can be very motivating. But I get into stuff, and then part of the growth is like you figure out how to finish it and you deal with what comes to you. But this was sort of, I think, just a piece of my personality. And so I signed up for a 9 to 10 year program because it was funded. And so you would go to medical school. You also would get a PhD. And that was why it was funded, because you're actually working and producing scientific research as a piece of that program. And they paid you like a grad student salary the whole time. So it was really different experience going to medical school. Also, because you did the first 2 years, then you went into the lab while your classmates went on, finished their last 2 years, and went to residency. So I instead did 2 years of med school, like all the book learning. Then I went into the lab and did a totally unstructured, I mean, that's what a PhD is. It's like there isn't a book that you study from. You have to show up every day and figure out what you want to learn, why it's important, and how are you going to do that. So, very different environment. And then you go back into the clinic and finish your last 2 years of med school. So, it's like this double stuff Oreo
Wow.
of medical school and science. So, that took me 9 years to finish it. And I learned so much. And interestingly, I did learn a lot of facts and things about medicine, and I learned a bunch of the science around immunology, which is what I studied.
Hmm.
But maybe more importantly, and this is sort of how we get into like the pivot, I learned a lot of things about performance and how people work, and
Hmm.
also like what were some of my greatest strengths and what I had to bring, and even like got to the root of like, what are you really interested in, Carla? That is very different from what can you do? Because I think over time I like worked to build my capacity. You know, if you run off enough cliffs and build a lot of parachutes, you can learn how to do a lot of things, but that doesn't mean those are the things that might most have you thrive or where you might be making your greatest contribution. And so some things that I really learned from those experiences were number one, I got to watch a ton of people go through really challenging environments.
Hmm.
So, med school, you have to take a bunch of standardized testing. You're in there with a lot of really smart people. So, and there are definite like bars you have to hit if you want to get the residency program you want, or even if you just want to like stay in it. And so, but then you get to watch a totally different group of people go through like the PhD, and deal with all the uncertainty of saying you have to plan and define your own path. Unlike medical school, it's not just laid out as a series of like gates that you have to get through. Um, in medical school, one of the things that they really taught us was quite early, actually, like how do you have high stakes decision making conversations with people?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
how do you talk with someone and pull out like what are their values? What are they worried about? Like, how might they make a decision about whether or not they want to have a surgery? And it's rare in workplaces that we get to have that like sort of decision making involvement, like that level of stakes early in our careers, like in our 20s. And but what is the art of that? And again, you know, that is certainly a piece of coaching, as you know, as I started that. But so that was one thing that was really interesting. And then in the PhD, part of what I learned was how do you think about an unstructured problem? And maybe the best parallel to like business here is entrepreneurship is not dissimilar from the scientific method. So this idea that when you start a company, um, you you aren't actually trying to do what everyone else is doing. You're not trying to look at the book, find the answer that everyone else found, and do it that way because you don't have a competitive advantage. And so, how do you actually figure out what are the best questions to ask? What are the questions that have interesting answers, even if you haven't found the answer yet? And how do you get yourself to sort of move forwards and make progress when there isn't a clear set of steps, for example, like there was in medical school? And so this there were so many kind of meta learnings that I got. I'm not sure this is what other people were thinking as they were going through this, but that's what I took away. And I thought all these things had a lot to do with performance. And so ultimately, as I was like doing a general surgery residency, like my first choice residency program, I was having the sense that like I had all these skills and ideas and interests that weren't quite aligned with the actual tactical practice of what it is like to practice medicine or surgery in a day-to-day basis. And that these themes about performance, how do you think about decision making when there's risks involved? How do you deal with uncertainty when you're trying to do something really challenging? Those spoke to me much more. And I felt like I had tons of skill, both at that moment, but also like what I thought my potential was. And so these are some of the things that led me to make a really hard decision to say, I'm actually going to leave my residency program and I'm going to open a non medical practice, and it is going to be a coaching practice. It's going to exist. It's not even going to be a psychiatry practice. It's going to be something really different, and I'm going to design it and build it myself. And so that was, I started the practice 12 years ago. But those are the things that kind of led to that decision. Again, not typical.
Yeah, yeah. I get it. I mean, I come from like this teaching music and counseling and then yeah, and then I ended up over here. So it's
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear though the way that you're able to distill the important practices and principles so that you can apply it in different ways.
Yeah. And I think that my brain has always sort of worked that way of and again, this doesn't always lead to positive characteristics. Sometimes I'm like impatient because I'm like, no, I get the principle, like, you know, moving on. But
Yes.
um but I think for me, from a very young age, I was a kid who was like, I want to be good at things, but how do you do that? And I, I do think I have like a good amount of natural talent, but also that feels so uncontrollable, right? Like if we're only thinking about performance as like what talent do you have? Okay, well, like we're going to be somewhat limited and it's so out of our control. And so I think for me, I always loved thinking about performance in terms of no, what do we control?
Mm.
What are the techniques? What can we work towards? And so from a very young age, I was always looking around to try and understand, well, what is that person doing? What is that person doing? If I think about something like this, how do I feel? When I think about it like this, does it feel better?
Hmm.
And so that principle driven, like trying to uncover what are the principles, is something that I think has been a thought process for me for a long time.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
am in fact a scientist, even though like I don't practice as one, but that is
So,
definitely how my brain works.
so how do you define performance science then?
Yeah. So I think about performance science as a multidisciplinary field. So it has lots of different contributing sort of thinkers, let's say. And I think about it as all the ideas that have something to do with what helps us as human beings go achieve the intentions and goals that we set for ourselves. And particularly when they're things that just aren't going to just happen, right? Like you wake up on Tuesday and like, oh yeah, okay, nope, that just happened. So I think some of the contributing fields are like, for example, everyone who thinks about strategy, like what is strategy, how does it work? So this might be the business schools, but also like certainly there's plenty of the entrepreneurial world contributing to this conversation. I think there's a whole another bucket of performance science that is really about execution, right? So like if strategy is sort of understanding what are the most important things one might want to do or what one might want to aim at, execution is much more about okay, well, once you've decided what those things are, how are you going to get that done effectively, efficiently, and um, and so certainly the productivity movement kind of contributes to that piece. That would be under the umbrella, but also like everything from like Six Sigma, right? Like to just thinking about any kinds of like org structures that tend to work better, right? So again, there's that. Certainly, how our brains work plays into that. So, for example, we know that if you're switching tasks very quickly all the time, your brain is paying a cost or a tax every time you do that, and you have to like reorient. So, again, neuroscience plays into that. I think another bucket of performance is this idea of mindset, right? The psychology of it. Where does confidence come from? How do we motivate a team? And thinking about so the psychology of it, but also like some sociology in there. And then the final bucket is really about physiology. And so certainly when we think about athletic performance, that one feels obvious. But
Mm.
I think in for all of us, it's really important. For example, if we are a decision maker, what is happening with our hormones in our bodies is very important. So if we are having an adrenaline response, our thinking is going to be more narrowed. We may be biased in a particular way and not able to be as open or curious about all the options, for example. So, again, also like how we manage stress over time has a lot to do with our performance. So, again, so really medicine contributes to this as well. How do we understand our physiology and what impact that has on the rest of our performance? So, yeah, that's kind of how I start to break it down.
Yeah. You made this leap from the medical field to coaching and that high performance. And then I've noticed that there's quite a few high performance people that are wanting to get into that wellness space too. They're very curious. Either they're having doing podcasts and inviting all kinds of wellness expert or health and wellness experts on, or they are providing their own insights into that. I'm wondering what your take is on. Do you have any concerns with that crossover, particularly where there's a lot more education and expertise involved in the medical side?
Yeah. Well, certainly as a broad category, there are always things that are out there, supplements, various things that we don't actually fully know the effects of, like, so just as an example. So I think it's always important to like be aware that there are whole categories of things, particularly in like supplements and those things that have not been like necessarily FDA tested in all the ways that in the medical side we would do things. Um, but I think there can both be people who are approaching that really well, and there can be people who are talking about a bunch of stuff that they might know about. And so
How do we know
it's
the
hard to sort of,
difference?
yeah, right. Well, and I I would say a great place to start is to like even just ask your like common sense meter. Like, or maybe a different way to say it is I think there are some wonderful wellness things that are probably solidly within a very great place to play. And this might be the better way to do it versus us trying to categorize, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
all of that. Right. So let's focus on what can people think about?
Yeah.
Um, so I think, for example, as we're thinking about caring for our wellness, we can say separate it mental and physical, although those two things actually are all a part of one body. So they're not, in fact, separate. And a lot of people, for example, ask about stress. I think a lot of the reason people get into the wellness like space is because we feel like we have a lot of stress, and we're now learning like we're getting a message of like stress is bad for us. Like chronic stress creates like physical illnesses. And one of the interesting things, and I really like Kelly McGonigal's book on this, and she's not the only person working and thinking on this, but I thought she did a really nice job in her book, The Upside of Stress, in reframing stress, because one of the first things we can think about with our mental wellness is like, how do you think about stress? And the truth is, like, our bodies are amazing and they were actually built to be resilient. They were built to be able to handle the up or the down. And that's important because when we want to do big goals, when we want to do something challenging and really create something or take a risk, we are going to feel some stress. And that, as Kelly would say, is because that means something that is really important that we care about is at stake. And that it is actually good to have things you care about in your life.
Hmm.
When we don't, that is actually a really challenging scenario to be in. So I think the first point is like, actually, our bodies were built to help us go up and down. And so the key is actually to say, how do we help make sure we know how to ramp down when, for example, we're feeling like too stressed in a particular moment that's important, but also to say, how do we just create a nice foundation over the long arc of our life or work where we're not spending too much time up, like at that high stress, high adrenaline level.
Hmm.
And so, for example, some great things or practices that people can lean into to create that long arc foundation is like thinking about sleep, right? Getting high quality sleep, and maybe most importantly, giving yourself a long enough sleep window. That is a very, like, I feel like a very safe place to lean into. Well
So it's okay if
documented.
I tell people you probably need to make sure that you're getting good sleep.
Yes, right.
Pretty
That's a
safe.
great place to look. But moving our bodies, I won't even say exercise, like
Yeah.
walking is tremendous. Exercise also great for us. So that's a kind of stress on your body that actually lets your adrenaline work the way it was sort of supposed to. Like we were built with adrenaline to like run away from a predator. I'm not sure, it originally was designed to be sitting like on a Zoom meeting, like being super stressed when we're not moving our body, and yet we have that like adrenaline coursing through us. So I think another great place to look is like movement for your body, thinking about what would be safe exercise. Every person's different, so again, be safe, knowing your own body, but exercise and movement, meditation practice, even just sitting. You don't have to like ascribe to a particular philosophy, but just sitting close, like kind of keeping a soft gaze or close your eyes and just like feeling your breath go in and out of your body, working on deepening those breaths. Like that has a physiological effect of helping you switch from like a sympathetic, adrenaline based kind of nervous system to a rest and digest. It's called the vagal system, but
Mm-hmm.
more parasympathetic system. So there are wonderful practices like that where also like getting some social and some community. For example, go get a hug,
Yeah.
go talk to a friend, go spend some time with a loved one. Like there are wonderful wellness practices that don't really go anywhere near something that might be like, is this approved? Is it not approved? That create a nice foundation for us long term. And then we can have techniques in the moment when we're hyper stressed to just give ourselves a little break. Sometimes that's a quick 5-minute walk. Sometimes that is really being able to uh, sort of reflect and ask yourself, hey, this matters to me. I'm stressed. I can feel it. Like, why is this important to me? Like, come back to it's good to have things I care about in my life. So maybe I should focus on why do I care about this? What does
Mm,
it actually represent that's really wonderful about my life and what's happening?
mm.
I have this opportunity and I'm stressed because it's a big presentation, but I have this opportunity and I want to be living a big life, right? You could do a little mindset like pause. But anyways, so maybe that's a great way to think about it. There are many things that don't go anywhere near sort of the weird edge. um, so yeah,
So
great
if
things to
it's
explore.
feeling edgy, maybe we should consult our doctor.
Exactly. Great recommendation.
Okay, sounds good. I really do appreciate the positive spin on. I mean, I've talked about being nearsighted. Like nervous feeling like you're nervous is also the feeling that you get when you're excited, and just that
Yeah.
that you can think of it like that. And I like that perspective of, um, this must be something that I care about. That's great. I love that. And another thing that this kind of brings up is how important it is for us to understand our humanity
Yeah.
in light of high performance. Like when I think
Yes.
of high performance, I know that there are some people who think of that and hear those words and go, they just bristle because they don't want to be thought of as an object, or they don't even like the word performance. That
Yes.
idea of if I'm having to perform and my value might be based on that. So talk to me about this I don't know, balance or the way that you view our humanity, yet also our
Mhm.
performance.
I love this question. And you are 100% correct. The idea of performance can immediately feel so judgmental that it's about being assessed and all of that. And this I had a conversation recently about performance reviews, and uh, someone was asking me like, "Oh, what are the best tools or this or that?" And one of the things that I was really thinking about is that when I think about performance, to me, I just like to reframe it that as human beings, I think we are thriving when we are learning and growing and see ourselves um, not because there is something wrong with the way we are. It isn't about we're not okay as is and we need to change and be better. I see it as we are beings that are happy in motion, or rather that feel more alive when we are in motion and evolving. Again, not as a reaction to I'm not okay as is, I must be different, but instead that there is a feeling of personal momentum in our life. And
Love
I
this.
see this for people every day. And in coaching, like yes, like I am a total high performance nerd. I love understanding like tips, tricks, and principles. But in my coaching, it is all centered around like what is the way in which each client would want to be growing and evolving.
Hmm.
Again, not because there's anything wrong with where they are, but maybe it's because they have a want, right? They saw something they desired and they were like, I would like to try and go do that. Or I believe that there is more in me that I could produce impact with in the world and I want to pull that out. Like it is in me. There's nothing wrong with me as I am. And this is definitely an and situation. And wouldn't it be cool if I'm excited to? And so we really sort of try and pull out what that is. And then we can use the tools of performance science to support that, but it is never about like let's assess where you are and judge all the problems. And truly sometimes people come in and say, Carla, I have a problem. Okay, great, we can also use performance science to fix whatever is the problem, but like that's not really how I think about it. And so I love sharing this perspective, and part of the reason I love like talking with wonderful hosts like you and being on different podcasts is to try and like spread this message around performance, because yeah, on social media and everything, there are so many just different or more limited ways that it gets presented that can be totally can turn people off in a big way. And so that's how I think about it. I think about it as we don't like to be stagnant as human
Mm.
beings, and I think often what is sometimes what people call like a midlife crisis. I often see it as a natural progression from actually becoming super competent at our work. Like often at that point in time, we became
Yes.
really good at some things and we're being good at those things, but there isn't something new. And we're starting to feel a sneaking sense of stagnation. So, this is my example that maybe people have experienced where you're like, well, I'm really good at stuff. Like, there's not a problem. And yet I feel like something's missing. And I think it's that feeling, it's like fish, right? Like, fish have to swim, or you want the water like going over your gills. Or like a different thing is like a sailboat. When you're in a sailboat, you can't steer unless you have water flowing over the rudder. And these are just some of the mental images I think about for us as human beings that we want to have like water flowing over the rudder. Like we
Mm.
want to feel a sense of motion and momentum.
Mm. So good. I care a lot about the topic of agency. Had a conversation with somebody this morning and they were like, "You talk about this a lot." I'm like, "Yes, I do." But I feel like this is connected to what you're just saying, that there's something new, yes, but like the I'm wondering for you, when you think about that and you pair it with this idea of I want to know that I'm making some sort of difference.
Yeah.
Is that, are you seeing those two things as similar?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. I think things can be distinct, but also like interact with each other and
Yeah,
synergize with
sure.
each other. And so I would say that I do see there being a distinct human desire to make a difference, to know why we're contributing. It kind of goes back to a fundamental sense of like, why am I important? But it also can really tie deeply into other belief systems as well, right? Like, um, but I do believe totally separate from any particular belief system or philosophy that there's a human desire to feel like one has made an impact or contribution. And this is very true in the workplace, but it's also true in our communities. And and what's nice is in some ways that desire to make an impact can then become sort of the object or the objective for, well, who would I need to be, or like what
Yeah.
kind of potentials might I pull out to make that impact, right? Almost like something that can pull us, like versus just saying I want to be better. Or and so this is an interesting way again where performance might be about saying, well, what is my objective? What is the impact I want to have?
Mm-hmm.
How do I want to make people feel? What are the things I want to create in my work or in my life? And then, so that becomes your objectives. Again, it doesn't have to be some like, I don't know, really shiny, like cliche high performance goal. Uh, it might be what's the impact you want to have. And then you can ask yourself, okay, like, do I have like right now, like just today, do I have what I need to kind of go do that? Or do I need to discover something within myself? Do I need to practice and learn a new skill? Right? That maybe just because, let's say, a person hasn't been doing public speaking, doesn't mean that they couldn't go give a talk to like a local youth group or like or YMCA or something, or do some mentoring, right? Like if that was, let's say, the impact they wanted to have for young people. And so again, but you might need to build that skill. If like talking in front of a group like totally gives you the shakes, or you're like, I just don't know what I would say, like that is something we can learn and work on
Hmm.
and kind of build a journey to do that. So I like how you connected those ideas, and I think they are ands, they are distinct and both important, and they have some relationship to each other.
Yeah. I do think that there are some people who just really love to achieve, and that is part of their nature, and so high performance would just like, yes, that is, I am all in.
Yeah.
But then there are others of us who are like, okay, but I need something, I need meaning tied to it. When there's
Mhm.
meaning tied to it, then I'm willing to put myself through the ringer a little more, like I'm willing to go through something that's more difficult or out of the box or whatever, because I know that there's something connected to meaning on the other side.
Hmm. Well, and I think this is great because you're like tying it straight back to some of the research around like how to manage stress and the idea of when our stress or when a challenge has a purpose to it, like our mindset shifts about what and we will still feel nervous. Like
Yes.
we might not notice that it feels different in our bodies. You get the stomach butterflies and all of that, but that there actually are impacts to what are the um, hormones that are going through our bodies, and that they tend towards the more beneficial sides of like stress that help us grow, like literally like grow our brains and like grow our resiliency, versus the negative side of stress hormones that create inflammation and those things. So, like that, what you're thinking about, why am I putting myself through this challenge, really matters. And so, I
Wow.
love your connection of like, it's important. You're like, I don't want to be in a challenge and have it have no purpose. That just feels dysfunctional.
Yeah, and I think what you're just talking about with the difference that it can make in our bodies is that's incredible. I mean, the fact that reframing the way that we're looking at our stress could potentially turn a situation that was going to go towards inflammation into, something more
Mm.
positive. I guess it's almost hard to believe. Like I kind of I've heard it, right? But it's almost hard to believe that the way that you're viewing things could have that much of an impact.
Yeah. And for anyone like listening who wants to learn more, again, The Upside of Stress is a great book that gets more into some of the detailed science around this.
Sure, yeah.
And so
Great.
great resource. But um, yeah, I think it's tough because again, some of these things are harder to measure. And on one hand, we don't want to like be unrealistic or have really unrealistic magical thinking about things, right? I
Mm,
always recommend like dealing with the reality in front of us, trying to
mm.
see things very clearly. But then in doing so, then taking that clear sight and saying, but I get to choose how I'm going to think about this. Right. So again, I think
Both
your point,
and.
going back to your first question of like, where do we get on the edge of things that like less
Yeah.
supported? But that's where I say, hey, I think it's important to like see things clearly, and then we get to choose how we think about it.
Mm. I think that's a really important. So this podcast has been around for like 8 years almost. And at this point in time, I've kind of taken a step back and I've said, what is it that I'm really, what are we really trying to do now? And the the thing that I really wanting to help people do is be able to know how they can help shape the future.
Mm.
Be a voice of influence, helping shape the
Mhm.
future. And that could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But I'm curious what your thoughts are about how high performance and the work that you do taps into how people can really help shape the future. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm. That's a very deep question.
Oh,
I
sorry.
think, oh no, 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 that was a compliment. I think fundamentally, and this is very meta, but I think I always look around and think when you have like people who feel empowered and are equipped with tools to like go do things that are meaningful and purposeful to them, that generally like things will be better, right? That um again, like we can be agents in our lives. We can create the lives that we want, and we can like work towards that. And again, this is hard, right? Like what one person wants or thinks is a good future is different from what someone else wants and thinks is a good future. So I'm not going to get into that, but um, generally, I think when we don't feel like agents, when we don't feel like we're equipped personally with something that can influence, even just our like how we feel literally ourselves, and then go like sphere by sphere out, right? Your local, your family, like, then your local environment, that I think that creates fear. And I think it creates like a sense of like, why bother, and apathy. And so again, what people choose to use it for, like, I can't say, but I think generally to not feel like we have like good ideas and clear ways that we can evolve ourselves, that we can go after the things that we like. I think that is it is decidedly better for us to feel that empowerment, and then we will use it how we use it. So that's sort of my very broad answer
Mhm.
is be like, yeah, equip people, and to know that performance and performance science is not this thing that is inaccessible. And part of the reason I like to have different principles and how to think about it is to say, hey, if there's a gap between something you want to see happen, an impact you want to have, or who you want to be, right? What skill sets you have. If there is some gap, that there are multiple angles you can attack it from. So it's not just like you tried one thing and it didn't work, so therefore I can't go get that thing, or I can't make that impact. So performance science says, hey, you could look at this from a strategic standpoint. Like, are there some more potent things you could do? But you can also look at it from an execution standpoint. Hey, what are some ways that you could be more consistent at working on the thing or doing the thing, or some different approaches for that? Maybe it's about like the mindset, right? Like the confidence in how you're feeling about it. Like you're actually doing a lot of the right stuff, but maybe to make sure you're really able to be resilient through the challenges of it, that's the place to be working. Or maybe your physiology, like you're not getting enough sleep and you're super stressed, and like even just improving those things would totally change how everything else is going. But I love it because it gives us a lot of ways to solve a problem. And
Mm.
I mean, there are plenty of problems these days that need solving. And so to me, it's an opening of options, not like a narrowing and a scarcity of options. So I choose when we are thinking more abundantly, we tend to feel better and come up with better solutions. So
Mm.
that's my thought on, yeah, just how does performance influence, like, what are the impacts we can have?
Yeah. And you know, that that mindset of having like that abundant mindset, I know that we don't always have that, and sometimes we feel resistance. It's could be internal resistance, and sometimes we might experience external resistance, other people not, um I think also with high performance, it can be intimidating to other people, and that can turn into a form of resistance. How do you coach people through, or even just give us a little paragraph or something about your thoughts on overcoming resistance?
Mm, that is a great question. So one important piece is sometimes we have to figure out if it's internal or external. And sometimes something that looks external is actually internal.
Oh,
So, for
sure.
example, like, if someone is like, "Hey, I have this great idea for something that I think would be an awesome like line of business for my company," blah blah blah. And we might talk about like, "All right, like how do you get the go ahead for that? Like, how do you get the resources you need? Who do you have to pitch that to?" And someone would be like, "Oh, okay, I need to." It'd probably be whatever my skip level, or maybe it's my boss. And you're like, okay, like, and they're like, you know, I don't know if I want to do that. Like, I don't know. And so it feels like it's external resistance.
Because your
Like,
boss hasn't approved it yet.
yes, exactly. But you have to like ask some more questions to say, well, you know, tell me about your boss. Like, what's your relationship like? Like, have you done something like this in the past? Did they tend to be like an open, receptive, like person, or are they a little more like, nope, you need to come with a super button down, like whatever proposal? You just ask some questions, and sometimes it comes out that you're like, oh, no, I mean, it sounds like this person, there would be no downside to like proposing it. They might say no. That is literally the downside. And you ask some more questions, and people start to realize like, actually, maybe they're having the thought of like, what if it's a bad idea? I don't want to look stupid. Or even just, what if they say no? And we have to kind of work through like, oh, what would that mean? Like, and yeah, it would be disappointing. It would be disappointing in that moment. And what else would it mean? And you realize, like, okay, maybe that might just be it. Like, yep, if they said no, it would feel disappointing. But then we also work through the other meanings. Like, but even if they said no, do you think they might, like, it might create other, like, visibility for you? That you took the initiative to come up with something and pitch it, that you were looking out for the good of the company. And maybe this is not the idea, but you're a person who takes the initiative, like does the work, and then socializes the idea and is graceful about accepting the outcome, even if it's like a no, right? So again, sometimes we have to work through like, is it internal? Is it external? Now, like when something is really external, um, then we have some interesting things to think about. Certainly, we can look at saying, like, if there's truly a blocker, first we have to say, is it truly a blocker, or is it just you might need to like really think about how you want to pitch or position an idea, right? Like you would have to work, you would have to do some work. You couldn't just kind of toss it out at like the weekly meeting. You would actually have to invest time and energy in it.
Be
Um,
prepared.
exactly. But
Yeah.
maybe it's
Interesting.
also like to say, all right, but if there's truly a blocker, are there other places you could try this idea? Or does the idea actually represent a value you have that we might actually find ways to express that value in other places in your work or life if there's truly a blocker and it's like, it's not going to happen. But like that's just one kind of specific example, but some different ways or questions we might work through to try and say, where's the resistance, internal, external, or both? And also, how might we approach it with some different options?
Hmm. So, if a person is leading a team and they are seeking high performance for themselves and they're starting to think, you know what, I think I could help my team with this. They want they want better performance, but at the same time they want to make sure that psychological safety is still strong
Mm-hmm.
because they don't want to turn it into threats or have people
Yeah.
feeling like they're the judgmental kind of feeling in your team. So what are your thoughts on how to help a team leader help their team
Mm-hmm.
become better at their jobs,
Yeah.
more high
Yeah.
performing?
Yeah. So this is where I love shifting like performance conversations like into one-on-one. Like there are absolutely reasons why like review tools and these things do exist, right? And often they go in conjunction with a conversation. But I actually think that having conversations about performance with more frequency than just, oh, this is this end of the year thing we do that determines my
Right.
bonus. Yeah. Move it out of that, move it and
Mm-hmm.
almost normalize it, because
Yes.
part of it is to not have this be a conversation about assessment, and to move it into that realm of, this is a conversation about how and where might you want to be growing as a person. And it can be a collaborative conversation, but I think it is important, if you want it to be collaborative, that you have to ask questions. You have to ask and understand like your team member, to say like, well, what's kind of in it for them, and why do they have this job? Like, why are they on the team? What's most interesting to them? Where do they ultimately want to end up? Right? What are the skill sets that might be interesting for them to improve at? And sometimes you uncover realities you can't bully. So, for example, I was talking with someone the other day, um, and there was an acknowledgement that they had a team member, and there were some things that team member was going to be excellent at, and they weren't actually the things that were like exactly what was the meat of their role currently. Um, but there was definite usefulness and value for those elements on the team, right? So sometimes you uncover stuff where, like, what that person most wants to excel at is not, in fact, maybe aligned with what I wish their performance would improve at this thing. um, Now, you are, if it's a collaborative conversation, you also get to express some things, and so some of it is to acknowledge in the areas where they might be curious or interested in growth, to try and brainstorm with them how they might start to like manifest or work on that and to get their input. Like, how do they think they could do it? You can also think about opportunities you might be able to match them with. But you also get to say, hey, like, I want to support you in some of that. There are also some things like just literally right now that I think would help you in the long run, even if like you say, I know this is not your long term, like this role, not your long term role. Like it doesn't excite you as much as other things. But I think working on some of these things would be helpful. And like I would be like happy to work on some of them and some growth in these areas. Like, are you up for that? And then you could start to design like, okay, well, what could that look like? And so again, the point isn't that in these conversations that like you don't get a say as the team leader, but also that I think people are most receptive and feel the least kind of just assessed and like this is an assessment conversation when there is back and forth. And also when they know even if you're asking for them to work on something that isn't their, reason to be, that it is a contribution to the team and that like they are appreciated for it. It is acknowledged that like, oh yeah, Excel spreadsheets, like I get it. Not, maybe not your reason to be, but so helpful to the team. And we're counting on you for that right now. And we can kind of support you and where like you also want to go as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Balance.
This conversation has just kind of flown right by. And so I want to make sure that we ask, where can people find you?
Yeah. Well, I love to be found. And
Okay, good.
I am on LinkedIn at Carla Fowler, and feel free to follow there. I'm always posting little ideas from conversations I have, and so that's a great place to follow along. And then my website's a great resource, and I actually have a whole media page that has I think every conversation I've ever had about performance science is up there, even my very first one. So again, like part of performance is an evolution. So if you ever want to hear like an evolution of, public conversations, feel free.
Wait, can I relate?
Oh, and so I bet you can, Andrea. And so that's at thaxa.com, THAXA. Lots of great information about coaching there too, if you are interested, and you can message me through the site. And I'll make sure you have good things for show notes if people want to find these things.
We will definitely do that. I will put those in the show notes. Okay. So, what is one last piece of advice that you would like to give somebody who wants to have a voice of influence?
Oh, I love this. Okay. My one nugget is that I think we overcomplicate a lot about performance. And again, like what's out there in the media doesn't help. So I often say that we don't need to be looking for a new trick. Like this, if there's something that like people are wanting to do in your lives, often you don't need like a new hack or a new trick or something. You often have a really good idea that you already know, and I always recommend start using that idea consistently. Like it is possible you will evolve from there and you will find a different idea, but so often we get stuck before we are having that influence we want because we're like, I don't have the right idea yet, or I don't know how to do this thing. And I actually think we have a ton of great, very reasonable ideas that would create tremendous impact if we just started applying them consistently. So that's my takeaway for performance.
It brings us back to how you described yourself at the beginning, the jumping off the cliff and finding, building the parachute. But yes, I love that. That's great. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Carla. Appreciate it.
Oh, you are so welcome, Andrea. This is really fun. These are my favorite kind of conversations.